Hey, what's up, guys? We're going to be doing the review for Jaws of Oblivion. It's a new expansion that should be coming up the day that this video is coming up. So we're going to jump into it. First thing I want to do is I want to shout out Ilaro from UESP, the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, for helping me out by getting me clean images of all of the cards. I'll link UESP in the description. Go check them out. They have full arts of all the Legends cards, which is pretty cool. So I've used those multiple times. And he was kind enough to give me all of the images in a big folder, and that was really cool of him. So, Ilaro, thank you very much. But we are going to talk about the cards from Jaws of Oblivion. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the rating system that I use. It is unchanged from my last couple of videos. How it works is a 1-star card is a card that never sees play. A 2-star card is a card that sees scattered play, usually towards the beginning of an expansion, but eventually falls off because it's not good enough to make any sort of meta impact as far as what it does. A 3-star card is something that you would find in a tier 3 deck, or something that maybe sees scattered play within tier 2 deck. A 4-star card is something that sees play in a tier 2 deck, or maybe sees scattered play within a tier 1 deck. Also could be something that pushes a tier 3 deck to the point where that deck is viable. A good example being Alphic Illusionist is a card that isn't necessarily in a tier 2 deck, but it's the only reason that Waxwayne is as good as it is in Monk. So that's a 4-star card, despite the fact that Waxwayne is not a tier 2 deck. Finally, the last rating is 5 stars. 5 stars are reserved for tier 1 cards, or cards that are so good that they push decks into tier 2. There's a lot of fluidity between these rankings, depending on how much play something sees. Some of these are easy to define. If you look back and say, okay, this sees play in a tier 2 deck, easily that's a 4-star card. Some of them, it sees play sometimes or doesn't see play other times. It's not a perfect system, but the reason I use this system is I think that rating decks is a lot more objective than rating cards. I think a lot of times cards can feel powerful, but maybe not have a huge effect. And it's tough to really gauge how powerful something is if you're trying to judge based on card. It's a lot easier to say, or a lot more consistent, rather, to say, okay, this deck is as good as it is. This card plays a part in that deck. That's why this card is good. So we're going to be doing this review in a little bit of a different format than I usually do. In the past, I've just gone through the colors and rated the cards in one by one as I went through them. This time we're going to be separating cards into groups of cards that sort of synergize with each other, are kind of aiming for the same goal as far as design goes, and maybe that'll help get a better idea of my thoughts on these cards when you think of them more as a whole as rather than an individual. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at Invade, and unfortunately, taking a look at Invade is actually very complicated. Let's start with what the mechanic does. The mechanic, the keyword, will summon an Oblivion Gate when activated. This Oblivion Gate is a 0/4 that is always summoned in the Shadow Lane, if there is room in the Shadow Lane. And the base version will give all Daedra plus 0/+1. So any Daedra summoned will gain 1 extra health. When you invade again, you will either summon an Oblivion Gate if there are none on the board, or if there is one on the board, it will upgrade that Oblivion Gate, and there are a series of buffs it can get. The second one will give +1/+1 to all Daedra. The third will give +1/+1 and discount all Daedra from hand by 1. The fourth will give +1/+1, discount all Daedra, and give 1 keyword. The fifth will give 2 keywords. All of these will also give the Oblivion Gate 2 health, but will have the 0 attack throughout the whole upgrade process. And at the same time, it is permanently shackled, cannot be silenced. You cannot use this offensively. So to properly look at the Invade cards, what we need to do is understand Daedra. Obviously, when you're looking at this, all of these buffs around Invade are centered towards Daedra. So if you're going to be playing an Invade deck, you're going to be playing a significant amount of Daedra. So real quick, we're going to start actually by looking at the Daedra in this set and what they add. First up, Blood Crazed Daedroth, 3 mana, 3/2. Summon, draw a card if there is a wounded creature in this lane. This can be either enemy or friendly. Now, I think this card is actually solid, but I think it only goes in one spot. I think that's Control Redoran. Is Control Redoran going to make any impact in the meta? It's sort of dubious. I'm very biased on Redoran. I always like Redoran. I enjoy playing it. So I'm going to let my bias show through here, and I'm going to rate this a 3-star card because I think this is a really solid control card. I don't think this is an aggro card. I think this is very strictly related towards control, and there's only a couple of control decks, I think, that really want to utilize this. So it'll be interesting to see if any of those control decks end up being good. Probably not. I should rate this a 2-star card, but I'm going to rate it 3 just because I know I'm going to be playing a ton of Red Ruin anyway, so I might as well give myself an excuse to try it. Clan Fear Runt is really interesting stat-wise. For aggressive decks, a 0 mana 1/3 is really solid. Specifically if you're running a decent amount of buffs. So you look at something like Hilalu, you look at something like Crusader, basically anything tokeny if you're using the aggro yellow curve. This could be really interesting, but I don't think it's significantly better than Septim Guardsman, and Septim Guardsman hasn't been seen anywhere since the Skulk nerf, so I don't think this is going to change any of that. If you have an aggressive deck involving Invade, maybe, but we are going to kind of avoid talking about these cards as they relate to Invade. We're going to be talking about these cards as they stand alone, and I think standalone this card isn't that good. It's just not significantly better than other 0 drops that don't see play. So I'm going to give this one a 2-star. Remora Channeler is really interesting in the amount of heal that it provides, in that this is close to Dark Harvester. Not close to Dark Harvester base, it is Dark Harvester, and it gets better from there. The problem is I don't think Dark Harvester really has a place right now. I think since the release of Moon Bishop in Moons of Elsewhere, I haven't found any necessity for using Dark Harvester for healing, because you just have better, cheaper options now that have more synergy with the deck, specifically if you're running Apprentice Necromancer. And I think this is only really going to be doing that. It's only really going to be healing, and I think there are better options. Even with the Prophecy, I don't think this is going to get pushed over the edge, although I do think people are definitely going to try it. It's not necessarily a bad card to have in any control deck, which will push people towards it, but I don't think it's that good, so we're going to call it 2-star. Reef Champion is pretty interesting. I did get developer confirmation on how this card works. Now, this card, even if you take... even though it only has 3 health, if you take more than 3 damage while it's being killed, that damage will be dealt. So, for example, if this gets attacked by a 5/5, even though it's only taking 3 damage, it will deal 5 damage to your opponent. And that is kind of the only reason this card isn't immediately written off, I think. Enraged Dragon Knight is a very similar card. It's a 4 mana 5/4 deal 2 damage versus a 4 mana 4/3 in theory deal 3 damage. But I think this does scale pretty well into the late game. Against other mid-range decks, you play this opposite something like a Mighty Conjuring. The worry of dealing 8 damage to your opponent is pretty strong in the late game versus something like Enraged Dragon Knight, which is just going to get blocked off by the guard. So I think this plays better into Shadow Lane late in the game. It is a little bit understated, but I think face aggro decks can deal with that. How good are face aggro decks going to be? I don't think they're going to be that good, but I think they'll certainly be present, so we'll call this one a 3-star. One thing I'm trying to do with this set is I am trying to be more aggressive about cards that I have a gut feeling on. In the last one, I was more aggressive about calling cards bad, and I felt very good about the results of that. So we're going to be trying something here, which is I'm going to be more aggressive about the cards that I think are good, because there's more of them this time. And I could end up with egg on my face with a couple of these, but I really want to put it out there. There's certain cards that I think are very strong. The reason I bring that up is Mehrunes, Dagon's Flair. I'm going to give this a 5-star. I think this card is very, very strong. We have seen throughout the history of Tessel some of the strongest cards, and I'm going to give 2 examples. In Goblin Skulk and 5th Legion Trainer are snowball cards that protect themselves. That is absolutely huge. They are cards that the act of having them on the board will allow you to snowball, but the act of having them on the board will also allow you to defend them on the board. And that's what this card does, and it does it, I think, very, very well. 2 attack at the start of every turn is absolutely massive in terms of holding board position. Your opponent will have a very difficult time clearing out your field lane if this sticks. And on top of that, with the decks that want to play this, example, I think being Hilalu, yes, the stat line's not necessarily great, but it's a stat line that holds a Scimitar well, that holds Orc Clan or 5th Legion buff. It's a stat line that works really well with those. And I just think this is generally a really, really high power level card. And this is going to be one of those that can really snowball out of control and can really push aggro. I think this is going to be a really tough card for board-based decks, control decks that are focused on fighting through the board. really can have a tough time dealing with this, I think, because it's going to trick just basically one trade a turn, and it's really tough to make up that disadvantage on the other side. So I really think this card is strong. Halalu is the obvious spot for it, but I think there's a couple other places it might go as well. I'm going to give it 5 stars. Next is probably the easiest 5-star rating in the set. It's Mehrunes Dagon Seducer. I don't have to tell you how good the 4-mana 3/6 stat line is. We've been seeing it for 3 years now with Hive Defender. It's been dominating the game for pretty much its entire existence. Mehrunes Dagon Seducer is the same stat line. It's a little bit more defensive where Hive Defender could protect your threats. Mehrunes Dagon Seducer is just going to be a card that aggro players have an absolute nightmare dealing with. This is such a ridiculously strong card against aggro. Because of the 6 health, it is so hard for them to take it out in any sort of efficient manner, and it comes down early enough that you're not going to be able to outrace the drain effectively unless your opponent basically skipped 1 through 3 and then just hope this saves them. Even in that case, sometimes this is going to save them. So I think this is a incredibly strong card. This is going to be absolutely a staple in a huge number of archetypes. Cross archetypes, cross classes. This is going to be a staple. Incredibly strong. Not a Daedra herself, but we have the Mythic Dawn Informer, 2 mana, 2/1, last gasp, summon a random Daedra to your hand. If this was printed in the last expansion, I would actually be pretty high on this card. I would actually say it's pretty good. But I think the problem is now you have very much a 50-50 division as far as Daedra goes, in that you have Invade Daedra, and there's something like 22 of them. I think actually 21 of the 22 Invade cards are Daedra. And then you have non-Invade Daedra. And if you're not playing an Invade deck and you hit an Invade Daedra, this is basically unplayable. So you can only play this within Invade decks. And even then, it's not a Daedra itself, so it's kind of just slow and putting the buff you get from the Oblivion Gate on a creature that you randomly are going to draw and might not even be good. So I don't think it's particularly strong. I'm going to give it a 2-star rating. Siege Crawler is obviously not good. We know enough about the game to know that 11 mana needs to impact the board in some way, or win you the game, basically. And Siege Crawler isn't doing either. So unfortunately, 11 mana, 15. If you're not familiar with why this sort of idea doesn't usually work, it's because against faster decks, this comes down too late. Against slower decks, they have a lot of ways to deal with it. So 1 star for the Siege Crawler. Sunken One is an interesting card to look at post-rotation, should rotation ever happen, as maybe something that could find its way into decks. But right now, when you compare it to Mighty Conjuring, even though Mighty Conjuring is conditional, the fact that Mighty Conjuring can be used as a defensive card is such a huge boon versus this. This just comes down and does nothing on the turn you play it. And even though it is very difficult to kill, it's just so low impact on the board right away that I don't think it's going to find a home. This is going to be a 2-star card. Evil Eye Warlord is another one that's actually a lot better than it looks, but unfortunately, Candlehearth Brawler is just such a much stronger card. You don't really look at this in a normal deck. If you're looking to use this kind of effect, you have better options. So I don't think the Evil Eye Warlord is going to see a decent amount of play, but I do think it's strong enough that some people are going to attempt it. And I think, don't be surprised if a year down the line, once Candlehearth Brawler rotates out, because that is a Skyrim card, that this starts to pick up and play. I'm going to give it a 2-star for now. Attuned Remora is really interesting in that I think it's kind of a trap. I think a lot of people look at Invade and they look at like Royal Sage stuff, and maybe Royal Sage stuff works there. They look at, oh, it's so easy to get this ward. I think the big thing about this is charge. I think this card is tied to the ease of getting charge in certain aggressive decks. The two I'm going to specifically mention are Aggro Assassin and Aggro Battle Mage. I think Aggro Battle Mage doesn't currently run Firebrands, but can fit them in. Is it worth it to run Firebrands to run this card? This is basically a slightly better Cliff Racer that maybe has some other upsides in that situation. It's possible. You've also got Stormcloak Vanguard. You've got a couple other potential low-cost chargers. And if you're comboing this on the same turn as charge, I think that's very strong. But if it's not getting charged, even a 5-mana 4/5 ward I don't think is particularly overwhelming. So it is worrying that I think there's only 2 places for it, and I'm not sure how strong those decks are going to be. I think Aggro Battle Mage is going to be good enough that this is a 3-star card, but I could be wrong about that, and Aggro Battle Mage might not even run it. Last, but probably least, Bedlam. 1 mana, put 2 1/1 scamps in your hand. I'm working under the assumption that these scamps cost 1. If they cost 0, obviously this completely changes. But assuming they cost 1, this is a 1-star card. This is just not doing anything on its own. It needs to be, even in a situation where you have buffs on board, you're looking at like Scouting Patrol and Marked Man being better. So this is something that is only really going to be played in the Invade decks. And again, we were trying not to do that with the Daedra. We wanted to look at these as individual cards. How good are these just as cards, and not in the context of Invade. And this one just doesn't measure up. And the last thing we do before we jump into the Invade cards is I want to take a quick look at the current suite of Daedra in the game. So it's not just the cards that are in this expansion. You're also looking at cards that already exist. We're going to limit these to red, blue, and yellow because all of the Invade cards are red, blue, and yellow, although I will do a specific mention for Redoran because Sword of Revenge is a Daedra. Maybe if there's so many good invasion cards and the invasion mechanic is so strong, you might see it push into Redoran, but I think it's unlikely. So as far as staple cards, cards that are Daedra or summon Daedra that are staple within the game right now, I came up with 4. They are Breton Conjurer, they are Alfiq Conjurer, Mighty Conjuring, and Golden Initiate. So these are mostly related towards the Atronachs. Out of all of those, only one of those is actually a Daedra. The other 3 just summon a Daedra. There are a couple more that I think are on the border, and if you're looking towards Invade where you're getting like buffs on Invade creatures, stuff that's on the border should be considered a little bit better. You have Lumbering Ogrim, you have Reeve, Aspect of Hircine, and Piercing Twilight, Supreme Atromancer, Shining Saint, Golden Saint, and Seducer Darkfire are all cards that I've seen play at various times. So that is basically where we're at as far as Invade goes. There is no Rebellion General in this set. There is no Moongate in the set. There is no one card that ties it all together and gives a huge payoff in one card. They did not do that in this set, but because of that, you kind of need to look at Invade as a whole. What is an Invade deck? An Invade deck is a deck that sacrifices stats at a certain point or sacrifices mana cost at a certain point to summon something that is going to buff Daedra. So it needs to be running a lot of Daedra. As we just talked, even being generous, we're looking at maybe 12 or so very good Daedra in the pool right now, and not all of them get played in the same archetype. As we just talked about the Daedra in this set, there are a couple that appear to be very good and staple, but you're still not finding a full deck's worth of cards there. These Invade cards need to do something on their own and need to impact the board on their own for this mechanic to be good. The thing about Invade, and it's unfortunate that we have so many cards dedicated to it, and this is my opinion on it, is that there is a lot of setup to Invade, but there is very little payoff. The payoff is very heavy in deck construction. It very heavily hurts deck construction and very much pigeonholes you into certain archetypes. And those archetypes already exist in very good forms. Invade has to be better than those to see play. I don't think it's going to make it. I don't think just buffing your Daedra, creating basically a training grounds that your opponent can interact with, is going to be good enough. So we're going to talk about the cards. We're going to talk about why that is. Before we do, if Invade ends up working out, I think it will be for this reason, and not this reason alone, but primarily this reason. When you play an Invade card, almost certainly it's going to be the first card you play in a game because there are a lot of low-cost Invades. It will be summoned into the field lane. The Oblivion Gate will be summoned into the Shadow lane. That's the key. The key to Invade is, can you have enough payoff for a built-up Oblivion Gate? Can you have enough powerful cards to hold field lane to force your opponent to split lanes early on? If you can, then Invade will push through, because that's a really big deal. Forcing your opponent to split lanes to try and take out the Oblivion Gate is, I think, a really big deal in terms of how these cards are going to function. But I think, especially considering how easy it is to kill Oblivion Gate, how many single cards like Execute can take care of it, no problem, I think for the most part, you're just going to see people ignore the Oblivion Gates. They're just going to fight normally because you're giving up stats on the creatures already. Like, yes, you play your Oblivion Gate. Say you get your Oblivion Gate up to level 3, and then you summon the Invasion Scamp, or the Invasion Scout, I forget what the name is. We'll talk about it in a second. The 3-mana 3/3 summon Invade. Say you do that. Then it's a 3-mana 4/4. You had the perfect first 2 turns, and you used it to summon a Mammoth. the payoff's just not there for me. So with that said, we're going to split these cards into kind of two different types. There are a couple cards that are generally meant for more aggression to get these Oblivion Gates out faster. The other ones are to maybe move a little bit slower throughout the game, get maybe big combo turns with your Oblivion Gate, get the Invade up from like 1 to 5 in the same turn, and then summon Daedra, which could be more of a control shell or more realistically a mid-range shell. But we'll talk about the aggro ones first. So we're going to go through all of the aggressive Invade cards, and we're going to rate them all at the same time. Oblivion Invasion, 0 mana, neutral spell, Invade. Invasion Scout, 1 mana, 1/1, summon Invade. Invasion Vanguard, 2 mana, 1/4, summon Invade. Invasion Marauder, 3 mana, 3/3, summon Invade. Agent of Mehrunes Dagon, 2 mana, 3/2. At the end of your turn, if you invaded, gain +1/+1. Volcanoes Mage, 1 mana, 1/1. When your ward is broken, invade. Unexpected Arrival, 3 mana, invade, then summon a random Daedra with cost equal to your Oblivion Gate. Remora Adept, 3 mana, 4/3. When Remora Adept gains a keyword, invade. Sigil Keeper, 4 mana, 3/4. Summon invade, then give your Oblivion Gate a ward. Mythic Dawn Zealot, 2 mana, 2/2. At the end of your turn, if you invaded, add a 1/1 scamp to your hand. Again, working on the assumption that these are going to be 1 mana. And last for the aggro cards, Widow Daedra, 4 mana, 5/3. After you break a rune, invade. Now, as far as aggression goes with Invade, I think the big problem is how easy it's going to be to run these decks out of Steam. You've kind of noticed that among all of the Daedra cards, as well as the cards that are presented here, there's not really anything that draws. There's not really anything that is going to consistently allow for 2-for-1s either, so you're very much reliant on that Oblivion Gate, making your creatures a lot stronger than what they are initially, which means if your opponent deals with an Oblivion Gate, you become incredibly easy to control, and then you're kind of not really left with a way to get back into the game. So when you look at a comparison to other aggro decks, you really are just giving up stats on basically every turn for maybe not that much effect. Now, a couple of these cards are versatile enough to be played in slower versions of Invade, which I think will be a little bit better off as the expansion goes on. But for the most part, I'm not really thinking a lot of these cards are going to see a decent amount of play, although I will shout out the Invasion Marauder, the 3 mana, 3/3, as probably the best one because it curves perfectly into the 4 mana 3/6 Drain Breakthrough, the Mehrunes Dagon's Seducer, that I think is going to be a staple in basically every single Invade deck. So making that a 3/7, as small as that might seem, is a really big deal. Other cards that I think have a little bit of potential, the Volcanoes Mage is obviously a very solid 1-drop that could potentially get you field lane control and use that in between lane mechanic that the Oblivion Gate is providing well. Unexpected Arrival is pretty easy to get that up to maybe a 3 or a 4-drop, but most importantly, if it's coming down on 1, there's only 2 1-drop Daedras in the game right now. That's Volcanoes Mage and Invasion Scout, so both of those invade, so basically it turns into 3 mana invade twice, which is nice if that's a good worst case for a card. Invasion Scout comes down and maybe contests your opponent's 1-drop, so maybe you can get away with that. Remora Adept obviously could snowball out of control, but I think that snowball is going to be rare, although there is the potential for getting this out on, say, turn 4 with a 1-drop and, snowballing the invade from the keyword that you gain, sending your Oblivion Gate up to something like level 5 super early. That could be tough to deal with, but overall, I'm not super bullish on these cards. Invasion Scout, Invasion Marauder, Volcanoes Mage, Unexpected Arrival, and Remora Adept I will be giving 2 stars as some of the better Invade cards. Oblivion Invasion, Invasion Vanguard, Agent of Mehrunes Dagon, Sigil Keeper, Mythic Dawn Zealot, and Widow Daedra, we will be giving 1 star. So looking at the more control-oriented Invade cards, I don't necessarily think that the cards overall are of higher quality, but there is one card amongst these that serves as maybe the best potential payoff for Invade. We'll get to that when we get to it. The Crisis Begins, 6 mana, destroy a creature, invade. Daedric Incursion, 3 mana, draw a random Daedra from your deck, invade. Mankar Cameron, 4 mana, 4/4, after you play an action, invade. Friendly Oblivion Gates will also have +4/+0 when he's on the field, so it just makes them more annoying to remove. Invasion Party, choose 3 times, invade or summon a 1/1 scamp, so you can invade 3 times, summon 3 scamps, or any anything in between. Great Sigil Stone, 4 mana, activate, invade, last gasp, draw a random Daedra from your deck and give it +2/+2. There are some misconceptions about this card. This does not draw every time you activate it. It will only draw once when it has finished its uses or when it has been removed by the opponent, then it will only draw once. Blast from Oblivion, 3 mana with Prophecy. Invade, then deal damage equal to your Oblivion Gate's level to a creature. Occult Rite Master, 4 mana, 4/3, add a Steel Dagger to your hand whenever Occult Rite Master equips an item. Invade. Keeper of the Gates, 6 mana, 6/6. When you invade, invade again. Mythic Dawn Acolyte, at the end of each turn, if you've invaded, deal 2 damage. And last but not least, Forces of Destruction. This is the card that I think is the reason to run Invade if you want to run it in a slower style. This is the strongest, maybe not the best, but the strongest Invade card, specifically because there are so many Invades in this set. So if you play this card, even without an Oblivion Gate, there's a good chance you'll get that Oblivion Gate up to level 2 or level 3. There are also a lot more low-cost Daedra in this set than we've seen previously, so there's a good chance you'll get 2 or 3 out of this. If you get that with a high enough Oblivion Gate, that can be pretty effective and sometimes game winning. Still, this is a 10 mana card, and even in the best situation, you're looking at something that maybe isn't even better than Supreme Atromancer. It's comparable to Supreme Atromancer, which is not played right now and is not necessarily a game winning card even when it is played. Aside from Forces of Destruction, a couple of the cards I think deserve special mention. Mankar Cameron is obviously going to be going in every Invade deck. It's really strong to give it an extra 4 attack, even if the Oblivion Gate can't attack, just because it makes it really annoying for your opponent to try and deal with it. Invasion Party is a great setup for Invasion. Being able to invade 3 times with 1 card is really strong if that's what your deck wants to be doing. Blast from Oblivion will pretty easily get to a 3 benchmark. It has Prophecy, it's removal, and it can also be used from hand on the same turn you do a lot of invading because it's relatively low cost. So I think it's versatile enough to be a pretty strong card in these invade decks. Occult Rite Master allows you to do some pretty absurd invading on the same turn, getting your Oblivion Gate up to a potentially huge amount if you have something like Salvage or Crown Quartermaster and just start stacking daggers. There's a lot of cheap items you can use on this guy to get a huge Oblivion Gate in 1 turn. And Mythic Dawn Acolyte deals damage. It can deal damage to either creatures or face, but either way, it's something that's potentially good enough to push it above some of the other Invade cards. So Mankar Cameron, Forces of Destruction, Blast from Oblivion, Occult Rite Master, and Mythic Dawn Acolyte will be giving 2 stars. For the rest, I don't believe there's really a lot of power level here with the other cards in this slower archetype. I think for the most part, these are going to be left behind. And I think for the most part, Invade is just not going to be particularly strong as a mechanic, at least not until we see the card pool changed in some way. So Keeper of the Gates, 1 star, and 1 stars as well for Great Sigil Stone, Daedric Incursion, and The Crisis Begins. So obviously that was the main mechanic of the set, comprising, with Daedra and Invade, about half of the set. There's still some left over though, and let's talk about that. We have 2 whole colors that we haven't even mentioned yet. First, let's take a look at the goblins. We have Bitterfish Witch, a 3 mana 2/2 with Prophecy, summon, give a creature -1/-1. We have Bloody Hand Chef, 2 mana 2/2. When you reduce an opponent's health or power as a result of an effect, Bloody Hand Chef gains that much health or power. Dust Eater Skirmisher, 1 mana 2/1. After an enemy creature damages Dust Eater Skirmisher, it gets -1/-1. And lastly, 3 Feather Warchief, set a creature's health to 1. We'll start with 3 Feather Warchief. I think it's the weakest of the bunch. While it does, in theory, trade 1 for 1 with literally anything by playing it on the board, it also only has 1 attack, so if your opponent does anything to prevent that trade, I think 3 Feather Warchief is going to be in a lot of trouble. It's just not going to get any value at that point. It's basically just become a 3 mana weakness. So I think there's better options, even for goblins, even for minus decks, than 3 Feather Warchief. I just don't think it's going to get a ton of value, so I'm going to give it 2 stars. The rest of the goblins, though, I'm really interested in. Bitterfish Witch, I'm going to give 3 stars. I think this is a really strong prophecy. Always interesting to see strong prophecies enter the pool because there's stuff to play around, there's stuff to think about, and I think this is one of those. While this is, in theory, just a 3 mana 3/3 prophecy when you account for the stats, I think the -1/-1 is a really powerful effect. I think being able to instantly interact with your opponent's board is a really big deal. Combine that with Dust Eater Skirmisher. Dust Eater Skirmisher, I think, is now the best 1-drop in the game to play on 1. There are other 1-drops that scale better, no question, but I think Dust Eater Skirmisher, if you're turn 1, you want something in your hand, this is the number 1 card to have. This not valued trades, but this trades 1-for-1 with basically every single 2-drop in the game. So if your opponent is on Ring, this is a great way to combat it. The only ones it does not are Mournhold Trader, Windkeep Spellsword, and Wily Kiva, which is not a big list as far as cards that see play. Those are the only ones that don't really get taken out by the Skirmisher. Even then, they lose some attack, and this card is just incredibly strong. This card is just incredibly strong. It's going to see play across a huge number of archetypes. This is a 5-star card. That leaves us with the most interesting one. That's Bloody Hand Chef. Now, Bloody Hand Chef is in an interesting position because with these minus effects, and you look at stuff like Murkwater Scourge, which is already in the game, Shearpoint Dragon, which is already in the game, the pace at which those decks want to play, I think, is too slow for Bloody Hand Chef. I don't think it's realistic to get Bloody Hand Chef down on 2 and get that snowball going. You can play this in an aggressive Goblin deck, and I think it's okay in an aggressive Goblin deck, but I don't think aggressive Goblin decks are going to be any good in this meta. I think when you look at Goblin decks, you're looking at something that is a little bit slow mid, a little bit closer to, you want to be using Murkwater Scourge, Leaf Flicker, Shearpoint Dragon as board control tools in the mid game. I don't think Bloody Hand Chef does enough for that. But Bloody Hand Chef has some very interesting applications in one class in particular. When you think about ways to deal with this Bloody Hand Chef, to give him massive amounts of attack and massive amounts of power, you end up at Monk. Monk has Cloudrest Illusionist as a staple card, as Shining Saint as close to a staple card, but it also has some cards that are not staples that are very, very interesting with this card specifically to potentially set up crazy amounts of burst, those being Calm and Harmony. Now, am I suggesting that you're going to build your entire Monk deck around Bloody Hand Chef and try to cheese them? No. But what I am suggesting is maybe taking current mid-Monk builds, current Strike Monk builds, and adding something like one of Harmony, making sure you have 3 Cloud Rests. That could add a secondary win condition. You're already running Monk Strike and Swift Strike. You could run this guy as another way to potentially buff something out of control, get it to attack multiple times, and push your opponent down from a pretty crazy number, something like 18, 20. I think this has the potential to do that. So in standard full-face Goblin aggressive decks, I think you'll play this guy, but I don't think he'll be good. In slower green mid, I don't think you're going to play this guy. But the one just in the middle, the Strike Monk, the slow deck that also goes for cheesy combos sometimes, I think that's where this guy belongs. I'm going to give him 3 stars. I think he'll be in that deck, and he'll be really fun to play in that deck. Next up, we have an expansion on some things that have been done in the game before, specifically hand buffing. First up, Outland Patrol, 3 mana, 3/4 Last Gasp, give a random creature in your hand +1/+1. Black Soul Gem, 4 mana support. Whenever a friendly creature dies, give a random creature in your hand +1/+1. Doomed Adventurer, 1 mana, 1/1 Last Gasp, give a random creature in your hand +2/+2. And Emperor's Attendant, 2 mana, 1/1, give a creature in your hand, not random, you get to target this one. Power and health equal to Emperor's Attendant power. Man, that's a mouthful. That's a lot of weirdly placed S's. So among these, there's a little bit of diversity here. The Black Soul Gem is obviously ridiculously slow. It is slow to the point that it is a slower card than something like Training Grounds or maybe even Mundus Stone. It takes so long to get value out of this, and in the end, it's 4 mana to give +1/+1 for each of your creatures. It doesn't go exactly on each. You can sometimes stack it all on one charge creature and go in, but I think that's super inconsistent to do that, and unless you're getting more than 4 buffs out of that, it's worse than just something like Sentinel Battle Mace in terms of, face damage when you put it on a charge creature. So for that reason, I think Black Soul Gem is a 1-star card. Doomed Adventurer and Emperor's Attendant, I think, are both going to be 2-star cards for different reasons. Doomed Adventurer, I think, has potential to maybe make it an aggro deck, specifically Empire, which runs a whole lot of guards. And hand buffs in the past have been pretty bad, mostly because it doesn't really give you any instant impact. The exception is if you put that on a guard. If you're putting it on something like a Emperor's Blade or Hive Defender, I think that's a really big deal. Empire already runs a decent number of guards in its aggressive decks, and even if it hits something else, it's not necessarily bad, although it is really low value, especially into the late game. It is another target for Necromancer as well, so I think some people will try it out there. Emperor's Attendant is different than the others in that it's targeted, and I think that's a big deal, mostly because I think it's a pretty big deal to get your Odurneron Necromancer to 4 attack. I think when you do that, you're opening up stuff like Supreme Atromancer and All-Feet Conjurer to be brought back, and I think we've seen sorcerers do that for a while, run Corsair Ship just to get that effect. I think Emperor's Attendant is a little bit better in that respect. Not particularly strong, because those decks aren't particularly strong, but it does have some usefulness, even if it does seem like a worse version of Ambitious Hireling at first. And lastly, for the setup cards, we have a 3 mana, 3/4 Outland Patrol. I think this is the best of the bunch. I think this is just a really, really high power level card. It is in the toughest class, or the toughest color to be played as a 3-drop because it's competing with Mammoth and Taunting Spirit. But in 3 color, I made this mistake with Discerning Thief. I'm going to try not to make it again. In 3 color, this is, replacing not a purple 3-drop, but a blue 3-drop. This is replacing something like Discerning Thief or Grey Viper Brigand. I think it's a little bit better than those. So I think this has, very low upside, but it's a 3 mana, 3/4 for control decks to contest, for mid-range decks to contest, and I think that's good enough. It gives you an extra little upside on the back end. Great. Can't complain. I think this is a really solid card. I'm going to see 4 stars. Next, among the hand buffs, there's actually a couple cards that very much get benefits from getting hand buff, stuff that really wants to be buffed before it comes down. Determined Supplier, 4 mana, 1/4 guard, last gasp, gain max magicka equal to Determined Supplier's power. Faded Wraith, 5 mana, 1/3 summon, draw cards equal to Faded Wraith's power. And lastly, this one's a bit of a stretch in terms of being a hand buff card, but we'll throw it here anyway. Unicorn, 3 mana, 2/3, friendly creatures in this lane with less power than Unicorn have charge. So these are all very different cards. We'll go by them individually. Determined Supplier, I think the problem with this is the fact that you're getting this ramp so late into the game, and ramp becomes less good the later you get it. Now, conscription is a thing in this game. Conscription is a thing that means sometimes ramping on turn 8 is still valuable because you get your conscription out a turn sooner. The problem with this is you can't do anything with it immediately. You play it down, and if your opponent kills it, you get 1 mana, you just played a worst Hist Mage for 4, you live with it, but you did just spend your turn playing a 4 mana 1/4. If they don't kill it, then you get to buff it, but really are ramp decks even running buffs? No, you'd have to rely on some of these hand buffs or Emperor's Attendant to get you there, so I don't think it's particularly strong in that aspect, and it's really low tempo and really not getting what a ramp deck wants to do. The reason Hist Mage is so good is because it instantly ramps you, allows you to get to that next 7. If you're a ramp deck and you're not really putting out threats in the early game, you just play this guy, and your opponent's just not going to kill it. Like, why would they kill it? Why do they want to ramp you? It's a 1/4. What's it going to do? So overall, I think Determined Supplier, definitely a really interesting card that could have a lot of potential applications down the road. Maybe there's a new deck that gets formed with it. I've been looking at stuff like Doomcrag, maybe aggressive Doomcrag with Orclan. Even then, I just don't think it's good enough. I'm going to give it 1 star. Faded Wraith, on the other hand, is another card that I'm going to take a leap on. I am probably going to regret this, but I'm going to give Faded Wraith 4 stars. The reason I'm going to give Faded Wraith 4 stars is I think there's 2 decks specifically, Empire and Veteran, as well as Tribunal, because Tribunal also has access to Divine Fervor, that can utilize this in something of a conscription shell. Now, what I'm looking at this card as is sort of a replacement for Namira's Shrine. This is something that can snowball draw. This is something the first one draws, but you find Galen withdraw, you find Fervor withdraw, you find 5th Legion Trainer withdraw. Once you get those, you will draw more off of the next Faded Wraith. If you can Galen, this is one of the best Galen targets in the game because it's going to be a 5 mana 4/6 draw 4 cards, which is ridiculous. It's not great until you get up to 3. 2 is okay. Two buffs, 5 mana, 2/4, say, draw 2 cards. It's not the worst thing in the world, but really you're not seeing a big benefit out of this until the late game. But this is a hyper late game card. This is a Namira Shrine level late game card. It's something that is going to basically blow out opposing control decks if you run it in specific conscription styles. Will the conscription styles be good enough? Will this be good enough in them? I'm taking a leap here, because I really see something here, and I could very easily be wrong. These decks could flop. Conscription decks are not particularly great now. This might not make them any better. This might not even make the conscription lists, but I see a lot of potential here. So I'm going to call this 4 stars, even though there's so much draw in the game. I think the snowball draw potential from this is crazy. Unicorn is interesting in that there's kind of two different archetypes it could fit in, and they're very, very different archetypes. The first is some sort of control scout running Arcane Venom Tongue and Cicero. Well, I think it's okay there. I think for the most part it's just doing what Squish the Wimpy did, although, to be fair, it is staying on the board after it provides that benefit at the expense of not being able to do it in Shadow Lane. The other one is Token Monk, and I think Token Monk is something that is a lot further away than people realize. A lot of people have brought it up as something that's getting a lot of cards in this expansion, but that was true for Alliance War as well, and it didn't really do much in Alliance War. I don't think that deck is particularly close. I don't even know if Unicorn's really that good in it. That being said, the Scout does interest me. I think Control Scout is very close to getting there. I think Ebonheart is still better than people realize, and Unicorn could be potential fits in that. So I think Unicorn, maybe a little bit overrated, but I still see a lot of potential here. I'm going to give it 3 stars. We have come to the easiest part of the review, because we have 4 cards here that all kind of work as cross-lane effects, and we get to talk about them very quickly. Miss Karkenlich, 4 mana, 3/5, summon. Choose an enemy creature. At the start of your turn, if the chosen creature is alive, summon a 1/1 Risen Dead with guard in its lane. Blade's Defender, 3 mana, 3/3, give a creature in the other lane +0/+2. Blade's Flanker, 4 mana, 4/3, give a creature in the other lane +2/+0. Blade's Guardian, 5 mana, 4/5, guard, give a creature in the other lane +1/+1 and guard. The reason this is easy is we're going to call all of these 1-star cards. Miss Karkenlich is a little bit different from them, but the power level is quite low on it. A 4 mana 3/5 is below enough curve stat-wise that it needs to be doing a lot more than sometimes summoning a 1/1. It's almost never going to summon more than 1. Sometimes it won't even summon 1 if you play it in field lane, so I don't think it's particularly good. The Blades cards are all understated for the sake of giving stats to the other lane. That's not what you want to do. That's not what you want to be doing in Tesla. You want to be playing mostly into the same lane to hold down field lane control, or switch over to Shadow Lane to try and race your opponent through Shadow Lane. You usually aren't playing both lanes enough for these effects to be good, especially not when they're taking big stat penalties to have these effects. So I don't think any of these cards are any good. We're going to give them all 1 star. Next up, we have quests. These are all have a similar theme in that when something happens, they will reduce in cost. They're all also named after famous quests from Oblivion, so it's a pretty cool theming. Let's talk about them. The Ultimate Heist, never mind. Let's not talk about them. We're going to talk about this one a little bit later when we talk about another card, so hold on to the Ultimate Heist. We're going to come back to it. Unfinished Business, 6 mana, costs 3 less for each friendly wounded creature. Unsummon a creature, then you may unsummon a friendly creature, so you can unsummon 2. Whodunit, 8 mana, costs 1 less for each creature in your discard pile, gain +2 max magicka. Defense of Bruma, 4 mana, costs 2 less for each friendly creature with 5 or more health, give friendly creatures +1/+1 and guard. Fingers of the Mountain, 6 mana, costs 1 less for each action you've played this turn, deal 1 damage, then 2 damage, then 3 damage to a creature. You can change which creatures. Lastly, Painted World, 12 mana, costs 2 less for each attribute you have in play, costs 2 less if you have a neutral in play, so that's 6 total. You can get this down to 0 if you have 1 of everything. Summon a Painted Troll, which is a 4 mana, 4/4 with Regenerate in each lane. Firstly, let's talk about Painted World. Obviously, not going to be a super great card. This is sort of meant for Unite decks as an alternate, not win condition, but something to do with the cards. If you haven't drawn Unite, at least you can get some sort of benefit out of them. But for the most part, it's going to be tough to get this anything lower than 6. And at 6, it's just a worse version of Golden Saint. So not a particularly strong card, but pretty cool flavor. Fingers of the Mountain just doesn't do enough for its mana cost. Actions generally don't. There's not that many cheap actions. There's a reasonable number of them, but there's not really that many. For the most part, you're going to be playing this for 4, 5, or 6. I don't think it's really good at any of those. I think it's mostly worse than Hard Removal. It's mostly worse than Ice Storm. There's just so many other things that I think are better than this. Even at 4, is this really any better than Firestorm? Firestorm even has Prophecy. This is a 1-star card. Whodunit is one of the weirdest designs you've ever seen. The flavor is awesome, by the way. The flavor is awesome because they keep stacking up bodies, and then you get the knowledge in the form of Max Magicka, where you figure out who did it. But late game ramp. First of all, why? Second of all, why is this not attached to any other effect? When you say, okay, maybe you can get this out on 5, you get Hiss Mage out on 5. I'd much rather get a 3-4 in ramp 1 than get nothing in ramp 2. So, and the fact that even in the late game, this isn't even a good draw in the late game because this doesn't replace itself. So it's basically not presenting any sort of threat onto the board. You're ramping for the sake of ramping. I don't think that's very good. That's going to be 1 star. Unfinished Business has a natural home in Market Archer, but I think Market Archer struggles to get its own creatures wounded. This is a very restrictive cost reduction. And I think the big thing is, well, you can pretty frequently get this down to 3 and even get it down to 0 sometimes. This is not game winning at 0, and this is game losing if it's in your hand at 6 and you can't play anything. So I think overall Unfinished Business is just not high power level enough. Even though it has a home, I don't even think it's going to make it there. So 1 star for Unfinished Business. Those were all negative, but we're going to talk about Defensive Bruma now. Defensive Bruma is a very, very strong card. You look at something like Mercenary Captain, you look at something like Divine Fervor, this competes with them. This is right on that same power level as them, I think. And the reason is because this is a very, very easy thing to trigger within Yellow Aggro. Yellow Aggro is already currently playing a lot of cards that trigger this, a lot of cards that can help trigger it, stuff like Cleric of Kind, and it's really easy to get to the point where this is 2. And this is a good card at 2. A lot of the other ones, you need to get it down further. This is a good card at 2 mana. This is insane at 0 mana. And this is also a card that synergizes really, really well with itself. If you play Defensive Bruma, most of the time that's going to get another creature up to 5 health. If you have another Defensive Bruma in hand, you get to play it basically for 0 then. That's really strong. You're going to see huge boards come out of nowhere with this, and it is limited in that I think this is going to be strictly in very aggressive decks because it is low value compared to something like Fervor. Even Mercenary Captain provides a little bit more value. This is just an action, just instantly, okay, here's my board, let's go. So I think it is limited to aggro decks, but I think those aggro decks will be good enough that this is going to be a 4-star card. This is really, really strong. Next up, we're going to go to Unique Legendaries, and I'll explain why we weren't talking about Unfinished Business. It's because of this man right here. I don't know. I don't have my OBS up, so I don't know where my hands are going. You just point up. I know I'm like down here, so like up here. Okay, this guy. Hannibal Traven. Super interesting when you think about OTKs. Now, Hannibal Traven in general could provide a whole lot of value. I think Hannibal Traven's a very solid card. It's a very slow card, very, very slow card, but it's a very solid card in that this can be versatile in a lot of ways, only in the late game, but versatile nonetheless. You can use this maybe to draw things with stuff like Spoils of War. You can use this to double up on the removal that you're playing to maybe get really good tempo when you end up killing this. And I think just overall, he can provide a lot of value for control decks. That's where he'll probably see play. But when you take a look at Unfinished Business, 12 mana, costs 3 less for each time you've pilfered or drained this turn, deal damage to your opponent, destroying their front rune, and then it has some random stuff about stealing the card in Prophecy. There's OTK potential here. Especially considering you have Pilfer as part of the ultimate heist here. When you're playing something like Bendaria Opportunist, pretty much just Bendaria Opportunist, honestly, you're going to be breaking runes anyway. You're probably going to have them down to at least 4 runes. So if you can get them below 20, it's pretty realistic to cycle through your deck, play Hannibal Traven, 2 ultimate heists, kill your Traven, 20 damage to your opponent. And that's crazy. That's enough to potentially OTK. And we've seen Assassin colors, which these two are in, support OTKs like this before in the form of Nixox, in the form of Burn Assassin. It really depends on how hard it's going to be to draw through your entire deck, how hard it's going to be to pilfer. Probably won't be good enough. Probably won't be easy enough to do. But I think the Ultimate Heist, because you could play it in something like Dominion, where you have access to a lot of drain that you're playing anyway, this isn't the end of the world if you're playing it for 3. It's still not a good card if you're playing it for 3, but I think a regular control Dominion can get this to 3 relatively easily. So I think there's a lot of potential here. This is probably going to be one of the first things I try, and it's something to watch out for. In the end, I don't think it's going to make it. I'm going to give Hannibal Traven a 3-star for control value and Ultimate Heist a 2-star for being something that people will attempt. Watch out for it in the future. If there becomes an easier way to pilfer or drain, I think this is a really interesting combo to watch out for, even if it doesn't show up in this expansion. Next up, we have Joffrey. Joffrey is a 5 mana 3/9 summon. Choose another friendly creature. Damage that would be dealt to that chosen creature is dealt to Joffrey instead. The big thing with Joffrey is at 5 mana with 3/9 stats, this is really well statted. And this can be used, I think, a lot better offensively than something like Lydia or Tirana, which have similar stats. By that, I mean you can play this to protect a threat more efficiently than something like Lydia. Lydia just makes it so any lanes can attack it. Lydia's effect is basically a downside, whereas Joffrey's, I think, is very much an upside. It's a minor upside. It's not a huge deal, but it is still an upside attached to a really well-statted body in a color that can use it, in a color that likes to play these mid-range sorts of games. And I just think it's interesting enough that people are certainly going to give it a try. I'm going to give Joffrey a 4-star. I think this is going to be a very strong card in a lot of forms of aggro or aggressive mid-range. Martin Septim, one of the best cards in the set. I probably don't have to explain that to you. 4 mana 3/7 is an incredible stat line. If you get it to 30 Magicka, you've already won the game, so it can change into the 30/30 Avatar of Akatosh, but we're not really going to talk about that. That's mostly irrelevant. But this is just a 4 mana 3/7 with a small upside, and that's amazing. That's really good. The stats on this are crazy, and that upside is real, even if it's not necessarily the biggest thing in the world. Just being able to get 1 or 2 Magicka throughout the course of a game is a really big deal, especially when you're looking at like slower Empire decks or Telvanni decks. There's so many decks that can use this that I think you might even see some decks speed up to fit the pace of a 4 mana 3/7 a little bit better. This is just a crazy power level card. I think it's going to be staple in pretty much everything that uses these colors. So, 5-star card. Mordred Orin is a little bit better than he looks, but not by much. The big problem with Mordred Orin is this is so bad if you don't have field lane control, because not only is it understated in that case, but you're giving your opponent a 1/1. So you have to have field lane control to play this guy. And if you do have field lane control, he's actually pretty solid, because you can pretty easily make him a 6/6. If you subtract the 1 damage that the token's going to do, say a 4 mana 6/5. That's fine. That's actually pretty good. So I think Mordred Orin is probably going to see some attempts. I don't really like him that much, though. Again, I think he's really, really limited in that you need to have field lane control to play him, and that makes it tough to get consistent value out of him, so we're going to call him a 2-star. The Gray Fox is really interesting. This is similar to a card in Hearthstone that was staple for quite a while, which was Azure Drake. That was 5 mana 4/4, draw a card, and had a couple other upsides as well. Gray Fox doesn't have those direct upsides, but he does have something that it makes him really interesting in control mirrors. Drawing an opponent from your opponent's discard pile may seem like it's the same as drawing a card, but in control mirrors, it is far, far better than drawing a card. So you can use this to seal something like a Mana Marco or a Marok, and you just get, you outvalue your opponent by such an absurd amount. And that's where I think Gray Fox is going to be really solid. On top of that, he's not really bad in the mid game. 4/4 is obviously not good, but I think it's good enough because it's going to be drawing something that is usually playable either that turn or the turn after. I think Gray Fox has a lot of potential in that respect. One comparison you could look at is Hollow Death Priest, where Hollow Death Priest takes the card out of the hand before it gets played. Gray Fox grabs it after it's been played and will do some damage with it, basically equal to what your opponent did. So it's a pretty similar card in that respect. I think it's pretty strong. I don't know if it's going to be quite the staple that it has the potential to be, so it's somewhere between 3 and 4 stars. I'm going to give it a 3-star card. I think this is something that is going to be in tier 2 decks, but it's not going to be in them all the time. Umaril the Unfeathered is a really cool looking guy. He's a 6 mana 6/3 guard. When Umaril the Unfeathered leaves play, summon him in the other lane silenced. Now, as far as leaves play effect goes, I'm looking at stuff like Close Call Night to Remember. I assume this also includes when he dies. Here's the thing, I don't think that's particularly strong. 3 health with guard is so bad. It is really bad, especially for a 6-drop. So I think this guy has a lot to work through, and just being resummoned in the shadow lane, because it has guard, it's not really that good even for aggressive decks, because it's going to be pretty easy to deal 3 damage twice for a control deck in one turn when you get to turn 6 and 7. So I don't think this is particularly strong. I might be missing some interaction in terms of the words leave play, so I'll leave myself that out. But if I'm understanding the card correctly, I'm going to give it a 2-star out of 5. I don't think it's going to really find a home anywhere. And lastly, we have come to the end. These are all the cards I didn't have room for. I didn't know what to really put them in. They maybe fit some one-off archetype. Maybe they didn't fit any archetype. Who knows? All over the place with these last ones. Wild Boar, 2 mana, 1/3. Wild Boar can't gain cover at the start of your turn. Wild Boar moves and gains +1/+0. 2 mana, 1/3s are not good. I don't really want to spend any more time on it. Yes, you could do some weird move stuff with it, but you could also do that with Awakened Dreamer. So, 1 star. Will of the Wisp, 2 mana, 3/2 drain. Interesting. Probably worse than something like Bruma Profiteer, but sometimes when you're building a deck, you just need that little bit of drain, just need that little bit of health gain to push you over the edge. I don't think Will of the Wisp is going to be it most of the time, but I could see people definitely giving it a try sometimes. So we're going to give it 2 stars. I don't think the power level's super high, but definitely could fit a need in very specific decks. Worldlywanderer, 5 mana, 3/5. Summon a support of your choice from your deck with cost less than Worldlywanderer's power. Now, speaking in the abstract, this has very, very high potential. This has a lot of potential to do some things we haven't even thought of. And even in decks that already exist, you could look at this. Maybe if you want to start running like Elixir of Vitality in Fervor decks or Praetorian Commander decks to bring out Fervor, this has a ton of potential in a lot of different ways if you can find ways to bridge the gap. There's also the forward camp decks that are super interesting and not as far away as people might think. But there is one very specific thing that is going to earn Worldlywanderer its 4-star rating as a very strong card, and that is that this card basically reads, summon, you don't have to play Monk anymore. And that's really powerful. It basically has the text, you get to play 3-color for Wax and Wane. Wax and Wane now gets consistency outside of the 2-color Monk decks. And that's huge. Now you can play Empire and Dominion and whatever the other one is that I can't remember right now. Halalu. Yeah, that one. Now you can play those. And those aren't Monk. But you could still play Wax and Wane. You could still do the crazy Elfic Illusionist combos with Rebellion General. But now you have a way to tutor out the Moongate to get them done consistently. I think that's going to be the immediate home for this guy. But he is going to probably find some places elsewhere throughout the meta. Going to be a lot of experimentation. Really powerful card. Look forward to trying it out. Arenthia Gorilla could create some Mexican standoff situations where nobody wants to attack each other, which is kind of interesting. But aside from that, I don't really see it doing too much. I think there's a lot of better 3 mana 3/4s with slight upside now. So this one's just going to be a 2-star. Blackwood Alchemist, just not good enough. Even when this comes back after being played in as a 3/4, that's still not good. It's really tough to play this field, which is huge as far as 3-drops go. 3-drops in purple are so good. This doesn't have a chance, I think. 1 star. Blade Stalwart, 4 mana 3/5. Blade Stalwart gets power equal to her health whenever she slays. Okay. Probably not good enough. I think you look at it as maybe being interesting in the Bone Armor OTK decks because it gives you something to do, like you can Enchanted Plate this up, and then you could get a huge amount of power from the first slay. I think that's worth it. I think people are going to try it, but I don't think overall it's that good. I think it's very limited to that specific style of deck, and it's not really that good of a deck, and it's maybe not even good enough in that deck, but still, it'll get enough that I'm going to call it a 2-star, but don't have high expectations for this one. Blind Moth Priest is crazy to me, in that I've seen so many people talk about how good this card is. I have seen somebody posted on Reddit their gut reaction top 10 cards from the set, and they had this at number 1. Their reaction in Reddit was that it was really strong, and I'm left doing the John Travolta thing, like, This is not a good card. There's a lot of 2 mana 2/3s with higher upside than this. A basic example, Poetic Armiger, 2 mana 2/3, that if you have an extra mana left over, you can get a free keyword. That doesn't see play. This upside is so low, and most of the time this is 2 mana 2/3 do nothing. Like, we have 2 mana 2/3 Prophecy Guard now, guys. The power level on 2-drops, even if they are 2/3s, is a lot higher than this guy. I don't think he's going to see any play. 1 star. Brotherhood Suspect. Now, I've had a lot of arguments about this card with people, and that a lot of people think this is sort of ubiquitous. This is something that's going to see play everywhere, and I disagree with that. I don't think it's going to see play everywhere. I think this is very limited. I think this card needs support to be good. That being said, where I think it goes is a deck that I think is going to end up being tier 1. and that's Halalu. I think this card is very, very strong in exactly Halalu. The reason is you compare this to Mournhold Trader. Mournhold Trader, one of the big benefits from it is the attack value. The 4 attack really, really matters for it because it allows you to eat opposing 2-drops and eat opposing 3-drops. This doesn't really do that. This is going to trade 1-for-1 with a 2-drop and then give your opponent the mana back, so it's mostly just going to be even, and you give your opponent a chance to take back tempo in an interesting way. But if there are enough early game buffs, if there's a deck that runs enough early game buffs, that's where you see the stat line kind of explode into insane field lane control. And that's Halalu. Halalu can use this card really, really well. And I expect Halalu to be one of the better decks in the game. Also got Mehrunes Dagon's Flair and Mehrunes Dagon's Seducer. Tons of good stuff for Halalu in this expansion. I think it was already very close. You also look at potentially Aggro Empire. It doesn't currently run enough buffs, I think, to utilize this, but it's not that far off if maybe it wants to add a couple more. So Brotherhood Suspect, limited in its usage, but the usage of it, I think, is going to be good enough that despite the fact that I was relatively low on this card when talking about it with people, based on my rating system, I have to give this card a 5 stars. Brotherhood Vampire, 2 mana, 1/2 summon, +1/+1 for each creature that died this turn. I think this is, you compare this to something like Feasting Vulture, and to be better than what Feasting Vulture is, Feasting Vulture currently sees absolutely no play. You need to have 3 creatures die. That doesn't sound super realistic to me, especially early on. You can't guarantee 1-drops are going to fight each other. Your opponent could just pass. Your opponent could kill the 1-drop on their turn. So I think most of the time this is not going to be very good on 2. And because raw stats don't really scale as much into the late game, I don't see this being a particularly strong card. I'm going to give it 1 star. Dead drop, 0 mana action. Give a friendly creature slay. Put a completed contract into your hand. This turn, it may move to attack creatures in the other lane. It's a very wordy card for something that's really bad, just really low value, not really providing anything. Maybe in market decks, if market decks can make a comeback, this could be kind of interesting. But for the most part, I think this is just going to be super, super low value. It's tough to find any way you put this into a deck, so 1 star. City Guard, 2 mana, 2/3, Prophecy Guard. Really simple, pretty solid. Purple 2-drops are fantastic right now. You're looking at Skinned Hound, Windcube Spellsword, Dragontail Savior, maybe the best 2-drop in the game. Ald Valathi Assassin is fantastic. There's a Barrow Stalker. There's a lot of really, really good 2-drops in purple. I think for the most part, this isn't going to break those, but there are going to be some decks that want the Prophecy, some decks that want this a little bit more than some of those other effects. And I think just because it's so solid, it's so easy to put into a deck, there's so many decks where it's really obvious to figure out where this fits in. I'm going to give it a 3 star. I think it's definitely, it's going to be a solid stalwart. It is not going to light the world on fire, but it is going to be solid. Dive Rock Fall is a 1-star card, but we're not going to talk about how bad it is because it is just a worse execute. But what I do want to talk about is the thematic part of this. It is kind of funny, the idea of pushing somebody off a cliff. But this is the anti-Oblivion Gate card. It's weird that this doesn't relate to Oblivion Gates in any way, right? Like, you just had an expansion where Invade is this mechanic that spawns 0 attack Oblivion Gates, and we're going to be pushing them off a cliff, I guess. It's kind of weird. Definitely curious that that's what they went with the anti-Oblivion Gate card for, but really low value would put it in your deck. You're not going to put it in over Execute. I don't think you ever want more than 3 Executes in a deck, so 1 star. Elixir of Potency is a mini Mundus Stone, and Mundus Stone not being a very good card, this not really being too much better than Mundus Stone. You don't really get a lot of value out of it if you use stuff like Cauldron Keeper. Watch it for something like Mage with supports with Forward Camp and that kind of stuff, but I think those decks are going to be better if they are Moongate decks, and blue doesn't offer too much. Maybe Dominion support Dominion Wax Wayne, if that ends up becoming a thing. Maybe you run this just because it's a 2 mana support, but overall I don't think it's that good. I'm going to call it 1 star. Flaming Breath, 2 mana, Prophecy, deal 1 damage to everything. It seems okay. It seems like it's okay and can do some things, but it's tough to figure out exactly where you put this. Obviously, people are going to talk about self-harm decks. The self-harm warrior, it's not a real thing. It's not going to be a real deck in this expansion. But if you look at control, there are some applications for control, but I think mostly it's just not good enough. It's just too low value, especially into the late game. But I think there's definitely a chance you'll see a deck want this kind of effect in more than just Skaven Pyromancer. So we'll give this a 2-star. Fresh start, 6 mana, draw 3 cards. People love draw. People are going to play this. They love draw. I'm going to call it a 1-star card. I think this is very low power level, significantly worse than something like Spoils of War, which is already difficult to play in control decks. And there's better draw than this in the game. There's so much draw in the game so much better draw than 6 mana do nothing. There really is. I don't think this is even remotely close to being as good as it needs to be. Giant Slaughterfish. 4 mana, 3/3. Give friendly animals +2/+0 at the start of your turn. So if you play this in Shadowlane, this is a 4 mana, 5/3. It looks terrible, I know, but you have to think about Mudcrabs. You have to think about Old Salty's Assault, which is definitely a force in the meta right now. The timing doesn't really line up because you need to play this, have it stick for 2 turns. The second turn you play the Assault because it's start of your turn. Maybe you can do it late game, but that's turn 9 and it doesn't really do anything. So I think overall the timing doesn't really line up, but it'll be interesting. I definitely look forward to trying this in the Crabscription decks and seeing if it ends up doing anything for them. But I think for the most part, it's just too easy to stop. Just too much mana to combo with the crabs on the same turn. So we're going to give it a 2-star. Lord of the Arena. The big problem with this card is you may look at it and think, oh, hey, cool, I get to kill 2 enemy creatures. But I think for the most part, that's not going to happen. You're going to kill one enemy creature and waken another, because most of the time they don't line up in that way. And the biggest deal is that you're not even killing the strongest one. You're going to kill whatever the weaker enemy creature is, then the stronger one's going to be alive. It'll be wounded, but you just used 11 mana, so how the heck are you going to deal with a wounded creature? It's probably just going to get the attack again. So as far as removal, I think it's very inconsistent. I think it is very heavily costed. When it does work, it is a 3-for-1 for 11 mana, and that's pretty solid, but I think it's too infrequently going to work. So we're going to call it a 2 stars. Marauder Chieftain, 4 mana, 1/5, but basically a 2/5. Summon, give a creature +1/+0. When another friendly creature gains power, Marauder Chieftain also gains that much power. This one, I'm going to give a big old question mark, because I don't actually know how this works with stuff like Divine Fervor, Northwind Outpost. I don't know how this works with like temporary buffs, or when this gets played and there's an Orc Clan captain. There's a lot of questions I have about this card that I won't really get answers for until tomorrow. If it works the way I think it does, where it does allow Fervor to buff it, where it does allow Orc Clan to buff it if something else gets played, I think it's on the border of being a 3-star card, but still probably a 2. If those do not work, this is a 1-star card. But again, I can't really talk too much about this one because the mechanics on it aren't really clear based on how the card works, and something we're probably just going to have to figure out by testing it. Mountain Lion, 3 mana, 4/3, summon, gain 1 Magicka this turn. Now, in any other set, I would write this guy off. I would say instantly, I don't think this is going to be anything. But I think it's worth looking at this card specifically because green just got 2 very strong 1-drops in this expansion. You have the Dust Eater Skirmisher and you have the Brotherhood Suspect, both really, really powerful cards that could be played alongside this guy. So that's kind of the problem, is you want to play this on 3 for the max tempo, but you also need a 1-drop to play alongside it. This is a good way to do that. This basically gives you a 3 mana, give yourself a ring charge for this turn. If you can utilize it, that's pretty strong, but I think 3-drops are really strong in the game right now, so unfortunately I don't think Mountain Lion's quite going to make it, but I think it's pretty close because of the cards we got revealed in the set, so we're going to give it 2 stars. Who knows, I could regret that. Mute, 1 mana, silence 2 creatures. Keep trying, maybe next time. Self-silence is still not a thing. 1 star. And last, kind of not least, definitely not least, Trusty Sword. 0 mana, +2/+0 item. This card's crazy strong. It's crazy strong, but how do you put it in your deck? How do you get value out of it? You look at stuff like Dragonstar Rider, maybe. You look at maybe doing some burst combos over the top, but in that case, you probably rather run stuff like Satanine, or maybe Sentinel Reclaimer as well as Satanine. So the 0 mana of the Trusty Sword maybe doesn't give you the best advantage. A lot of times in the early game, it's not allowing you to go 2-for-1 for anything. It's just trading 1-for-1, and obviously that's not bad for a 0 mana card, but it is really low value and could eventually lead to you gassing out. Aggro Battle Mage is okay. I think Aggro Battle Mage thinks about playing this card. I think this is legitimately, there's a power level to this card, but I think it's just too tough right now to justify putting something this low value into your deck. I could be wrong. This could be good enough that it pushes Dragonstar Rider on its own, but I would lean towards that not happening, so we're going to call it a 2-star. Hey guys, it is currently 6 a.m. I'm just finishing up the editing, about to set everything up for the review that is coming out. This is going to come out at the end of the review. I realized at the very end when I had finished everything that I forgot a card, which is not uncommon. I've forgotten cards, I think, in the last 2 expansions as well, but I caught it this time, so we'll throw this in at the end. The card is Remora Archer, 3 mana, 1/1 Prophecy Summon, deal damage to a creature equal to Remora Archer's power. I think this is obviously not particularly strong. Even if you get the buff from the Oblivion gates, it's only getting up to a 2/2, so it's a slight discount on Ash Servant. And if this isn't getting any buffs, it's obviously catastrophic. It's a 2 mana increase on Sharpshooter Scout. I don't think the payoff is enough for the downside, so I'm going to give this one 1 star. All right, that's going to be it. Hopefully this gets out on the day of the expansion. This is going to take a while for me to edit because I've been sniffing and doing this after basically every single card. I have some really annoying allergies right now. But hopefully we'll be able to get this out quick for you. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll take a look back at this in a couple months and see where I was right, where I was wrong. Leave your comments on what you think I got right, got wrong. You know, the whole 9 yards. You guys know. Yell at me for making fun of your favorite card. Yell at me for saying Invade was bad. Feel free to do it. I am happy to be wrong. We'll be trying these decks on stream, probably today, assuming that's when this goes up. We'll be trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what sticks. So yeah, I hope the new expansion is going to be fun, and I'll see you guys there.